So as Yasmin's mentioned, I'm going to talk to you today about charity fundraising, the changes, challenges and income sustainability. But I think first of all, it's probably good if I give you a bit of background about myself. So yes, I do currently work as a senior associate solicitor at Thursfields, and I specialise in charity matters, but with a particular focus on legacy issues or charity disputes. But prior to joining Thursfields, I did work in the charity sector in-house as a solicitor, firstly with the PDSA, and then later with the British Heart Foundation based in London, managing the legacy team there. So that's a bit of background about me, and probably also gives you an idea that my presentation as we move forward is going to include quite a bit of content around legacy marketing and management. But I think the first thing is, before we move to the income sustainability side, and I'm hoping for a change, my presentation is going to be a positive one, bearing in mind the current situation and current climate rather than a kind of angle of negativity. But I think probably we need to identify, first of all, that there have, of course, been changes and challenges as a result of the COVID situation, and of course, as a result of a recession that's anticipated. And with that, I think the obvious first change that I've noticed is that there have unfortunately been redundancies throughout the charity sector, and that's clearly impacted on the various fundraising strategies that have been put in place, the various sources of fundraising income that are available. And there's also been changes in people's working environments. Whilst I know the charity sector by and large has been quite ahead of the game in terms of embracing home working, actually it's embraced it even more in light of the COVID situation, which has probably also presented even more difficulties for marketing and fundraising teams who would have ordinarily come together periodically to discuss ideas face to face, but in addition has made it difficult to access certain venues, people and services away from the working environment, those third parties that you would perhaps need to discuss organising events with and that kind of thing. And of course, those events haven't been able to go ahead. That in itself, of course, has presented challenges. Those charities that have been able to, I know, have instead, rather than look to make redundancies, attempted to redeploy people or restructure teams so that there can be skills transferred across, which of course is a positive with bringing different skills into a new area of fundraising. But equally with the issue to do with events, because a lot of medium-sized or smaller charities do rely very heavily on events fundraising, it's meant that there's had to be some more innovation, creativity, and probably a bit more risk-taking, I'd say, around the whole how you move forward with fundraising income, how do you still host those events and that kind of thing. And with that, I know even when people have felt confident that perhaps when the restrictions were being eased, that they could perhaps look towards bringing people together for events, it meant there was an increase on the health and safety aspect that was needed to be considered. And I think even more than that, how do you sustain, or dare I say even look to grow fundraising income during the current climate? So I think bearing in mind all those changes, all those challenges that the sector has had to go through and at times embrace, we're now looking at actually where does that leave the charity sector as a whole. I've seen lots of reports that initially on the surface felt like a lot of doom and gloom, and actually I think there are a lot of positives we can take from the situation if we take a step back, and I think that is around income sustainability. So fundraising experts, as many of you have probably seen, have actually said that they think over the next 3 to 5 years, the sustainable forms of income and those which see the sector through are going to be, in fact, major gifts and legacies. And And I know that some charities have already heavily invested in those programs, and that means now they can reap the benefits of it. But equally, I'm conscious that there are a number of charities out there, particularly the smaller or medium-sized charities, that have in fact been relying very much on certain areas of fundraising that really for the moment aren't gone forever, but are very much on the back burner. So for example, as I've mentioned, events, but equally corporate partnerships. Whilst businesses now are going to be looking at their financial situation, their financial resources, they're probably not going to be embracing so much the corporate partnership idea. So whilst I think that it's important that charities maintain those areas, at the same time, there needs to be a consideration on where that investment now goes and whether it should be diverted to these other areas. In terms of the legacy side, and as I've mentioned, legacies really is my background. And that's what I advise many clients on now. And I can see that many of my charity clients are already realising the need to embrace legacy marketing. Lots of people have been investing more in legacy marketing campaigns. They've been driving forward the message. They've been coming up with new initiatives. And of course, what's fantastic about legacy marketing is, whilst yes, you can try and sell that to people when you pull them together and they're in front of you face to face, equally, it can be done via means where you don't need to meet people face to face. So you can use social media, email, post, television, radio. There are so many resources available in order to promote legacy marketing. I am, however, conscious that quite a lot of charities will say to me, the problem is for us that we want the money now. We don't want to wait on a legacy campaign and wait for those funds that may not actually arrive with us for a good few years. And whilst I take that point, the difficulty is if you never start your campaign, you are never going to have it there as a sustainable form of income when the next problem arises, which may be in some years' time. And I think in addition to that, what I'm also noticing lately with charities is when they are receiving legacies, there needs to be a proper review of whether those legacies are being handled in the right way. So for some charities, the money is already sat there, but actually methods aren't being employed that could be employed to ensure that that income is being maximised for the full benefit. And there are ways around doing that. And that's part of my job here at Thursfields, to advise our charity clients on how they can ensure that they are getting the most of their legacy gift, because ultimately that's what your supporters wanted. So I'll give you an example. I've known of a situation where a property went on the market one day and the next day the asking price was received. The solicitor put pressure on the executors and on the charities to accept the asking price offer. And actually the charities said, well, we can't move on making that decision that quickly because we can't get our charities decision makers together in order to follow through on that. That was very fortunate because actually a couple of days later, there were 2 more offers for that same property for the asking price, which of course then meant there was an opportunity for people to put forward best and final offers and for the beneficiaries to receive a better value for that property. Now, that's just one small example of the processes that charities should be going through, but there are many more that are being overlooked. And I think now more than ever is that opportunity to understand and appreciate that more than banking and thanking, there's a need to drill down on legacy income and to ensure that the proper procedures and processes are being followed, partly because of ensuring you're following the correct legal procedures, but equally to ensure that you're doing the best for the charity in terms of the income. I think it's probably good if I can back that up with some data as well. So a study was carried out recently which showed that on average, a charity invests around 4% in its legacy marketing campaigns. But actually, the fundraising income it receives as a result of that is 44%. So that suggests a 1% investment brings an 11% return for the charity. And when we're in a situation as we are now, where funds may well have been earmarked for events or corporate sponsorships, or those areas where they can't be driven forward in the way that have perhaps been hoped in the fundraising strategies that have been prepared, there's an opportunity to look to divert some of those funds towards legacies and major donors and take some calculated risks, which I think, based on that data, suggests would not only benefit charities now in the immediate, but also in the longer term, particularly once their legacy campaigns start to come to fruition, because of course their people will have the skills and the processes and the resources available to them in order to ensure they're maximising the income at that point. So pretty much this is the end now of my presentation, but I think what I'm saying is now, as far as I can see it, the positive from this is an opportunity for charities to step back, to realise what they already have and to make the most of what they already have. That's not about stopping events and stopping corporate partnerships totally, but it's about making some very careful and what may seem risky, but I think calculated risks in order to actually ensure that they weather the storm during the next few years.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Katherine, for sharing your knowledge with us. That was really helpful. If anyone has got any questions for Katherine, just a quick reminder to put them in the chat box, and we will answer them at the end of the session, if that's okay. But thank you again, Katherine. Now on to our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce David. I can't actually see him on my screen. David, if you could start sharing your screen, that would be great. Thank you.
There we go. Can we see that?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time. I'm David Harding. I'm Support and Development Manager at Herefordshire Mind, and I wanted to share some thoughts, some ideas and some resources that you may wish to use personally, some resources that you may wish to share with teams if you are in a position where you manage other people. A lot of the work that we're doing at the moment, not surprisingly, comes off the back of us all collectively living in this time of pandemic. And we recognise quite significantly that the longer this abnormal way of living continues, the bigger the stresses are on us individually and for those that we support, whether that be professionally or personally. So I wanted to share some thoughts and ideas. This is of personal interest to me. Getting work-life balance right is a constant struggle. It doesn't matter what sector you work in, but I have lived experience of significant mental health issues, which came off the back of 17 years working in the corporate sector. And particularly at the moment, I think we need to be very mindful of our own personal well-being and those around us. This is going to be a fairly whistle-stop tour, but as I say, we're going to share the resources after the event. So I wanted to start by asking a question, I guess. What is mental health? Now, we haven't necessarily got time to have an in-depth conversation about that, but I think it is important that we reflect on some of the common statements that we hear in a lot of the media around this. We all have mental health, emotional well-being, just in the same way that we do with physical health. And I think it is important that we recognise our own challenges at this time. Just to put some context on that, this is what the World Health Organization defined mental health as. A positive sense of well-being, that's a fairly general word, a belief in one's own worth and the dignity and worth of others. So it's not just about us as an individual, but it's about those who we come into contact with in whatever way within our life. The ability to deal with the inner world of thinking, feeling, managing life and taking risks. And particularly at the moment, I think that risk-taking element is acute for all of us. The ability to initiate and sustain mutually satisfying personal relationships. Again, that speaks to us not being isolated as an individual, but it's being part of something bigger than just us. And the ability of the mind to recover from shock and trauma. Again, a lot of the work that we do is with people who have experienced traumatic events in their life, and we see every day the impact that has on their emotional well-being and their ability to function. It's also important to recognise that mental health issues, emotional struggles are common and are increasingly common, particularly at the moment. Some statistics that we cite, you can see on the screen at the moment. Sadly, 112 people will end their own life this week in the UK. 250,000 people will visit, whether that be physically or at the moment virtually, their GP about a mental health problem. And there were nearly 71 million antidepressant items dispensed in England in 2018. So lots of people are struggling. And as a society, the numbers indicate that we are getting sicker when it comes to mental health. So there's lots that we don't seem collectively to be getting right. So I think it's important that we empower ourselves to take steps and make changes to look after our own mental health. Causes of mental health problems are wide-ranging. There's a few listed up on the screen at the moment, which include biological issues, which speaks to that statistic I mentioned about antidepressants. There are indications around genetic links to emotional health problems. I've also referenced trauma, particularly in early life, and life events, whether that's bereavement, bullying, work pressures, all sorts of things. One of the big unknowns is why I may experience a bereavement, for example, and someone else experiences, in essence, the same situation, and I have the ability to recover from that, find a place for that event psychologically, and the other person can't. Again, there are multiple reasons why that's the case. So it's not a linear process. It's also important to recognise, again, particularly in the world that we're living in at the moment, that other issues can challenge our emotional well-being, which includes physical health problems, medication, and I mean prescribed medication at that point, illicit drugs and alcohol, both quite commonly are used as some form of coping strategy, but obviously it goes without saying that if that becomes problematic, that can have quite devastating impacts on our emotional well-being. Sleep is one that is often missed in the conversation. Sleep is vitally important to all of us. It's not about everybody having 8 hours a night of good quality sleep, because everybody's sleep patterns are individual. But it is important to recognise that as creatures, we are designed to sleep. Our diet is critically important to our emotional well-being, as is exercise, and there's huge amounts of evidence to back those two up as well. It is important that we talk about our emotional well-being. In a work context, excessive stress can lead to poor mental health and time off work. We need to be more open in the conversations that we have, particularly in the workplace. And interestingly, from some research that we've done nationally, it's highlighted that there's a discrepancy between how well managers feel that they are supporting their staff and how well staff feel they're being supported. And that's about communication. It's about open conversations, and I'm going to come on and share some resource around that in a moment. It's also important for employers to consider investing more in workplace wellbeing, because that can very often impact on their bottom line. I've mentioned some of this in the previous slide. We advocate a three-pronged approach, as it's called. So some generic promotion of staff wellbeing, which includes ourselves as individuals within that. Trying to identify and tackle the causes of any particular challenges around emotional wellbeing in the workplace, wherever that occurs, and absolutely supporting staff who are experiencing mental health problems. It's also worth just reflecting on why people work whilst they are sick. And this talks a lot about the culture and the nature of the organisation that they work in. It's particularly acute at the moment. Katherine referenced earlier the challenges, certainly particularly in the charity sector, but across the economy, where job insecurity is an enormous issue for so many people at the moment. With redundancies, that can lead to increased job demands and intensity, insufficient resourcing, but also a feeling of not letting people down. There can be some structural issues within organisations that don't recognise in the correct way those that struggle with their emotional health. So I've listed a couple of examples around absence policies, but sadly, harassment and discrimination is still a real issue. There's that feeling of irreplaceability, which I think some of us, I certainly recognise at times. You know, the reality is none of us are irreplaceable. And sometimes the demographics of our organisation too, and the responses within that can also pose challenges. So one of the resources I just want to highlight in this brief session is something called a Wellness Action Plan. And again, Yasmin is going to send out a slightly better version of this. It didn't convert terribly well onto PowerPoint, but I will talk you through it. This one is particularly aimed at the challenges around working from home for some of us that are having to do so at the moment. Now, this screen isn't particularly clear, so I'll just talk you through the headlines of it. Identifying triggers. And that takes a little bit of effort, sometimes some recognition, just stepping back. we are all different, and what affects me working from home is going to be different to everybody else. So it is worth recognizing and taking some time to check in with yourself around what's working, what isn't, and being able to communicate that either with your line manager or with the rest of your team, and recognize that we're all still learning. Even though we may well be 8 months or so into these current circumstances, it's going to be ongoing. So we need to make it as right as it can be for us, and also recognize that that's going to change over time. It's too easy, and I know this from personal experience, not to take time for yourself. Recognizing that it is okay to step away from the screen sometimes, and making sure that you then create a structure around your working day. The fact that you're working from home still means that you are allowed breaks. Being kind to yourself as well, recognizing that it is going to increase our sense of self, stress on our sense of self, but that it is okay to explore that, whether that be, again, just personally within your own head or writing things down, but also with the wider team. One of the things that has become abundantly clear with the work that we're doing at the moment is that connection with others. We are, at our most basic level, social creatures. So interaction is critically important. And because of the world we live in at the moment, we are finding that an increasing challenge. You know, the fact that we are here today on a screen is great, but it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of everybody, when what we really need to do is see somebody face to face. So it's actually recognizing that, and understanding that being on a screen, and it may be that you're involved with Zoom meetings all day, every day, that doesn't take away from the loss that we may feel around being in the same room as other people. The other one that is highlighted on there is around celebrating small success. Yes, it's great to celebrate those big headline achievements, but at the moment, we need to recognize that sometimes the fact that you're working from home and you have been able to keep your internet access all day is actually a win. And, you know, try and create a little bit of humor around all of that as well. This wellness action plan does provide a template for some questions that you can either use individually or to share with your team. And it goes through a series of questions. So I'll just run through these briefly. And the first one is, what details would you like to share with your manager about your current working situation? And that's about some honesty, but also knowing where you want to put the boundaries around that. But yeah, do be honest with that recognition around the challenges that you have, because trust me, we're all facing them. It's also recognizing the change that we're all experiencing. And it talks about your usual working environment and what helps you stay mentally healthy at work. Now, that might be regular breaks. It might be having some sort of social interaction with your colleagues that isn't necessarily about work with a capital W. But it also links into the next question about how might you adapt into your new working environment, and what triggers that then links into. What challenges do you face? It might be because, for example, you and a partner are then having to juggle both home working and collecting and dropping off kids at school. But it's being open about recognizing those challenges and not being fearful of talking about them. And also, you know, we are, as I say, 8 months into this, and having a little bit of self-reflection on what's the experience been like when right back at the start, we were all plunged into lockdown very suddenly. We all had to find very different ways of working very rapidly. How was that then? And reflecting on to now, is it better? Are there some common struggles that you're still facing? And what can you, together with your team, do to possibly mitigate that? For those people that struggle with poor mental health, again, this is about recognizing that and putting it front and center, and also finding a way to communicate how that might impact on your work. It lists a couple of examples around difficulty in making decisions and struggling to prioritize, but could be a number of things. But it's about structuring it, actually writing the words down and then communicating that. Also, are there any early warning signs that you need to be aware of, but equally your colleagues or a line manager need to be aware of? And again, that's about honesty of communication. That also talks to the culture of the organisation that you work in, so that you are not afraid to discuss how you feel, because you shouldn't be. There's some proactive things as well, because it's not just about you and you doing the best that you can, but also asking a manager or colleagues, what can they do to help? What can they do to minimize those triggers for you, or recognize when you might need some time out? And just trying to structure that, balancing it against work pressures, but recognizing that overall in the bigger picture, in maintaining your own emotional well-being is fundamental for you, but will also be beneficial in the far longer term to make you more resilient in the workplace. And also, again, broadening that out, are there any early warning signs that your family or other members of your household might notice? And that's about a conversation too. And these things aren't necessarily easy, but I guess this wellness action plan is just a prompt for some of the questions that you might wish to reflect on. That leads on to what support you can get from those that you live with. And that might again be some recognition that you're finding the work-life balance even more challenging because of having to work from home. And that final question is, who do you want to share the wellness action plan with? Now, we would advocate that you share that, or at least some of that, with colleagues, certainly with a manager, but it allows you and gives you permission to control that information, how you share it and when you share it. Most of all, this document gives a structure for you personally, just to give yourself some time to ensure that you are looking after yourself. I'm just going to finish with, again, all these links are going to be sent out. The internet, as we know, is an amazing place, but there's also an awful lot of really bad stuff out there. So there are some useful links that we're sharing, that safe links that we advocate. And also bear in mind that, you know, we spend our lives plugged into these things, and sometimes it's worth recognizing that actually you can use them as a telephone, and you can dial numbers and speak to real human beings. And there are some great resources out there for contact and actually speaking to another human being. So that's a somewhat whistle-stop tour. But as I say, these resources will get shared afterwards. So yeah, do feel free to ask any questions, and I'll endeavour to answer them. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, David. Some really useful tips, statistics, and a great action plan there, which I'm going to be sending to everyone after the presentation. So thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions, either for Katherine or for David? I'm just going to check the chat box. We have got a question for you, Katherine. So the first one is, what if the charity has ceased to exist by the time the legacy materialises?
Okay, so that's a very technical question. It really depends on a variety of factors that we'd need to look at in that particular instance. But what I would say is, just because a charity doesn't cease to exist doesn't necessarily mean that that gift doesn't still stand as a charitable gift. Very generally speaking, first of all, we would try to ascertain whether or not that charity had merged with another. So, for example, at one time, there used to be the Cancer Research Campaign, and there used to be the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. Those two at one time amalgamated and now form what we know as Cancer Research UK. So that means that the gifts that are in wills named to, say, Imperial Cancer Research Fund, they don't fail, they now pass on to Cancer Research UK. If there are instances where there's an issue because the charity hasn't actually merged or amalgamated with anybody else, then really it depends what happened at that point. If it was a case that the charity just went out of business and there were liquidators, etc., then in theory the funds should still go to them, in terms of the liquidators, I mean. But equally, there are times when there's what's known as the rule of Cyprus, and that basically means as near as possible. So it can be that executors can approach the Charity Commission and look to have that gift diverted to another organisation with very similar aims and objectives. So as I say, it really just depends on a whole load of factors that we'd need to look at in that specific instance.
Perfect, thank you. Next question again is for Katherine. So are there good examples of successful social media campaign to launch a legacy campaign?
I don't know in terms of, I would say in terms of launching it, I think there are fantastic examples out there of charities who are using their social media to promote legacies. And although I sound like I'm the cheerleader for cancer research at the moment, actually, they're a really good example of that. I mean, cancer research, when it comes to legacies, are the biggest. They receive the greatest number of gifts in wills. They are top of the legacy league table, if you like. And they have specialist teams dedicated to dealing with the legacy marketing and the management side of things. But ultimately what they do is they have their social media campaigns already, and they manage to bring in the legacy aspects really well. What I'd say is, more than anything with legacies, it's really emotion driven. It's not a lot of the time a logical decision. It's very much an emotional one, and it's about making that connection. And ultimately, as we all know, people buy into people. And that's one of the things that the charities like Cancer Research have done really well. They've shown how their work has been so positive, the great progress they've made, but they also make it very individual. They show people's personal stories. And I think that really resonates, but it's about using those resources. They do it on television, but equally they take that across to social media. So I'd say it's perhaps not so much about launching, but it's about introducing legacy campaigns into what's already there for your social media.
Lovely, thanks, Katherine. I hope that's answered your question. Next, someone has said consider running a Giving Tuesday campaign this year. Proven initial donations are larger, donor retention rate is longer, and does not adversely impact normal December giving. So thank you for sharing that. Angela has requested the copy of the triggers and questions, so I've got that to send to you. Beth has said, having complementary therapies again has been so valuable in filling a void creating in me from loss of positive touch, hugs, etc. Have also given in to my daughter's plea for a dog. Puppy Max is now sitting on feet and has transformed working from home, which is great to share. Thanks, Beth. That's fine. Sorry everyone, I'm just trying to catch up here. So Claire has shared, thanks Katherine and David. Tying into wellbeing at Vamos Theatre, we're launching a campaign to combat loneliness as we go into the winter and possibly more and more local restrictions. It's called the Wednesday Wave. Happy to share details via Yasmin if you would all like it. It may be of interest to local charities and your service users and help to brighten people's day through the winter. So thanks for that, Claire. I'm happy to share that if you would like to send it to me, and I can put that on the follow-up email as well. Elizabeth has got a question for David. Is there anything colleagues can do to support staff when helping with returning to work? In your opinion, what works best?
I think the most important thing is listening. Don't assume that you know what is going to be best for that individual. So there's an analogy, isn't there, that we've got one of these and two of those, and we should use them in that proportion. So I think it's about listening, taking time. There's some structural things around planned return to work and how that's structured, but it's listening and doing the right thing at that time and using it as a golden opportunity to recognise, as I mentioned earlier, how best to support that individual, what their triggers might be, and how to mitigate that versus the challenges that come with work pressures.
Perfect, thank you, David. Then we have Elizabeth said thank you, that's very helpful. So I believe that brings us to the end. Claire, if you could send me that information, I'll pop that on the follow-up email as well. But thank you to both of our guest speakers today. I hope everyone's found that useful. I will be sending up a follow-up email with all of that information on. So thank you to you both for your time today. Just before you go, I've just got some information and events to share from the Chamber. So tomorrow at 12 till 1, we've got home working advice and guidance to support your employers. Support for employers, sorry. And then tomorrow 3 till 4, we've got the Hereford Town bid, how you would spend 25 million in Hereford, and that's more of a virtual round table event. Are both free for members, so if you'd like to join that, please let me know and I can book you on. And just one other plea. So the Chamber have launched an employment survey to help businesses benchmark their response to COVID-19 against other local businesses. So I am going to share the link on the follow-up email. But if you could kindly take 2 minutes out of your day to fill that in for us, we're trying to get as many responses as possible. So that would be a real help. Thank you. I believe that is the end of the forum. Hope you've all found it useful and beneficial to your businesses. We are going to plan another one in a couple of months' time, and I'll send you all the information for that. But thank you again to our speakers, and thank you all for joining us. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.